The doors that never open. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you're ready to step into a place where freedom doesn't just disappear, it's erased. The chase ended on a frozen highway outside Orenburg, headlights slicing through snow as police vehicles boxed in a black sedan skidding toward the shoulder. Steam rose from the hood. The driver didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply sat there, hands on the wheel, breathing slowly, as if he had already accepted what was coming next. His name was Sergei Volkov, and by dawn, his life outside prison would be over. The crime itself had shocked Russia weeks earlier. A carefully planned contract killing tied to an underground financial syndicate, carried out with surgical precision. No witnesses. No panic. Just a body discovered in a quiet office building, positioned deliberately, as if meant to send a message. Investigators would later describe the scene as coldly instructional. Volkov wasn't accused of pulling the trigger. He was accused of orchestrating everything: the money, the timing, the silence that followed. During interrogation, he said very little. He corrected a date, clarified a time, refused to deny anything else. At trial, the courtroom was packed with journalists and families who wanted answers. The prosecution laid out years of evidence: encrypted messages, shell companies, financial trails that looped through 3 countries before vanishing. The defense argued circumstantial connections. The judge didn't hesitate. Life imprisonment. No possibility of parole. When the sentence was read, Volkov didn't react. No outburst. No collapse. Just a slight nod, as if confirming a decision he'd already made himself. The destination wasn't announced publicly. It never is. But within the prison system, there was no doubt where Volkov was going. Black Dolphin. The transport took 3 days. Windows sealed. Chains fixed tight. Guards rotated every few hours, none speaking to him, none meeting his eyes. By the time the gates appeared through the frost-covered glass, Volkov understood the truth no one had explained. This was not a prison designed for punishment. It was designed for permanence. Black Dolphin Prison sits isolated in the Russian steppe, far from cities, far from distractions, far from hope. Officially known as Penal Colony No. 6, it houses inmates sentenced to die behind bars, not by execution, but by time. Every man inside is there for life, and every rule exists to ensure they never forget it. As Volkov was unloaded from the transport, he was forced to kneel, head down, hands bound behind his back. Guards surrounded him in silence. He wasn't allowed to see the building. He wasn't allowed to see the yard. The first thing Black Dolphin took from him was perspective. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and cold concrete. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a pale blue glow. Cameras followed every movement. Doors opened and closed with mechanical finality. The intake process was efficient, almost clinical. Uniform replaced with standard-issue clothing. Hair cut short. Personal details reduced to numbers and codes. Volkov was no longer Sergei Volkov. He was an inmate in a system that had no intention of ever releasing him. What surprised him most wasn't the strictness. It was the silence. No shouting. No banging on doors. No chaos. Inmates moved only when instructed, spoke only when permitted. Even their breathing seemed regulated, synchronized by routine. Volkov was escorted down a narrow corridor lined with reinforced doors. Each door represented a life that had ended somewhere else. Murderers, terrorists, organized crime leaders whose names had once carried weight beyond prison walls. And yet, here, they were all equal. Or so it appeared. Volkov's cell was small, bare. A metal bed bolted to the floor. A sink. A toilet. No window to the outside world. The door sealed shut with a heavy click that echoed long after the guards had gone. That was when Volkov noticed something strange. Scratched into the wall near the bed were faint markings. Lines. Shapes. Not graffiti. Not random damage. They looked intentional, placed carefully where only the inmate could see them. He leaned closer. The marks didn't spell words. They didn't form symbols he recognized. But they followed a pattern, repeated across the wall, as if part of a larger design. Over the next days, Volkov noticed the same markings elsewhere. Under the sink, along the edge of the bed frame, carved so lightly they could be missed during inspections. When guards passed his cell, they avoided looking inside for too long. Not out of fear, out of habit. As if lingering invited something unwanted. Volkov kept his head down, followed every rule. He learned quickly that survival at Black Dolphin wasn't about strength or intimidation. It was about observation. And observation revealed something unsettling. Certain inmates, despite the isolation, seemed aware of things they shouldn't know. Schedule changes, guard rotations, even minor system failures. Information moved without communication. Influence existed without contact. During a rare medical check, Volkov passed another inmate in the corridor. The man never looked up, never spoke. But as they crossed paths, the inmate tapped the wall twice with his knuckles. That night, Volkov found 2 new scratches on his cell wall. Deeper than before. Deliberate. He reported nothing. Complaints didn't travel far in a place designed to bury them. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into something shapeless. Time lost meaning. Yet the markings multiplied. Not just in his cell, but everywhere. As if the prison itself was being quietly rewritten from the inside. Then came the inspection. A senior officer noticed the carvings during a routine walkthrough. The reaction was immediate and severe. Cells were sealed. Inmates restrained. Entire corridors locked down. The prison had discovered something it didn't want to acknowledge. As guards scraped at the walls, removing the markings, they uncovered older layers beneath. Dozens of them, some dating back decades. Patterns repeating across generations of inmates. This wasn't new. It had been happening for years. And Volkov realized something chilling. Black Dolphin wasn't just holding men sentenced to life. It was holding a legacy. A system of influence so quiet, so patient, it could survive total isolation. And whatever that system was, it had just noticed him. But when officers forced open a sealed service corridor behind his cell block, what they found there would change everything they believed about Black Dolphin Prison, and the men trapped inside it forever. The empire without voices. The service corridor behind Volkov's cell block hadn't appeared on any official blueprint. That alone unsettled the administration. Black Dolphin was designed to eliminate blind spots, every corridor mapped, every corner monitored. Yet this passage existed like a scar beneath the prison skin, sealed behind reinforced panels and hidden beneath layers of paint and concrete. When guards forced the door open, the smell hit first. Old metal, dust, something stale, long untouched by fresh air. Flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel lined with faded numbers and symbols etched directly into the walls. They were the same markings Volkov had seen in his cell. Only here, they were organized. The investigation was internal, quiet, and urgent. Black Dolphin didn't leak stories. It erased them. The warden ordered the corridor sealed again within hours, officially classifying it as an obsolete structural remnant. But the discovery sent ripples through the prison, and prisoners felt it immediately. Schedules shifted without explanation. Movement became even more restricted. Guards were reassigned, rotated unpredictably. Some transferred out entirely. Tension settled into the concrete like cold. Volkov understood what this meant. Someone had panicked. And panic inside a place like Black Dolphin was dangerous. He began noticing changes in the behavior of inmates who had been there the longest. Men who never reacted now watched guards with subtle intent. A slight pause. A measured breath. Small acts of defiance, so minor they were invisible to cameras, but not to someone trained in control. Volkov had spent years operating within criminal networks that thrived on silence and structure. He recognized patterns others missed, and what he saw disturbed him. This prison had an internal hierarchy. It wasn't built on threats or alliances made in whispers. There were no conversations, no meetings, no visible exchanges. And yet, decisions were being made. Collective ones. Meals were refused on the same day by inmates in different wings. Medical requests surged simultaneously. Lights flickered during the same hour across multiple blocks, forcing technicians to respond again and again, always one step behind. It wasn't chaos. It was coordination. The administration blamed system strain, aging infrastructure, human error. But Volkov knew better. Someone, or something, was testing the boundaries. His first direct contact came unexpectedly. During a scheduled exercise period, inmates were led one by one into isolated cages in the yard. Thick walls separated them. No eye contact allowed. Guards stood above on platforms, weapons visible. As Volkov stepped into his enclosure, he noticed an object on the ground. A small stone. Perfectly smooth. Perfectly round. That shouldn't have been possible. The yard was inspected daily, cleared of debris, controlled down to the smallest detail. Volkov bent slowly and picked it up. Carved into its surface were the same symbols from the walls. That night, when he returned to his cell, the markings were gone, completely erased. In their place was a single line freshly carved. One symbol, different from the rest. He didn't need to understand its meaning to feel its intent. He was being invited. The next weeks changed him. Not outwardly. His routine remained flawless. Compliance perfect. But internally, Volkov began reconstructing the system around him. The symbols weren't random. They were a language designed for isolation, something that could be shared without speech, without writing, without direct contact. It relied on placement, timing, repetition. A code that could survive decades of separation. Black Dolphin hadn't broken these men. It had forced them to evolve. Volkov realized the truth slowly, unwillingly. This wasn't a gang. It was an institution within an institution. A shadow network formed by men who would never leave, who had nothing left to fear except irrelevance. Their currency wasn't violence. It was patience. And patience was infinite here. The network had rules. Don't attract attention. Don't disrupt balance. Don't expose the structure. The goal wasn't escape, it was endurance. Influence without visibility. Control without command. Volkov's reputation followed him even here. Other inmates recognized his discipline, his silence, his ability to read systems. That made him valuable and dangerous. One evening, the lights in his cell dimmed briefly, just a flicker. When they returned, a new mark had appeared on the floor near the door. A variation of the symbol from the stone. The message was clear. They were watching him. The administration sensed something shifting but couldn't isolate the cause. Surveillance footage revealed nothing overt. Informants didn't exist in a place where speech itself was a liability. Every attempt to assert control only tightened the system's grip. Then a guard disappeared. Not vanished entirely, but reassigned without explanation. His colleagues whispered about it in private. He'd asked too many questions. Noticed patterns he shouldn't have. Pushed for reports that went unanswered. Officially, it was routine. Unofficially, it was a warning. Volkov understood the implications. The network wasn't just internal anymore. It had reach. Influence extended beyond cells and corridors, into decisions made in offices far above the prison floor. And now, Volkov stood at a crossroads. He could remain invisible, just another life sentence, counting meaningless days. Or he could engage. But engagement came with risk. One wrong move could mark him permanently, not as an ally, but as a liability. The decision was made for him. During a medical check, the doctor paused longer than necessary while checking his pulse. His fingers pressed twice against Volkov's wrist. Twice. The same signal from the corridor weeks earlier. Volkov looked up. The doctor's face remained neutral, professional. But his eyes held something else. Recognition. That night, Volkov found a final message carved deep into the wall, beside his bed. Larger than any before. Impossible to miss. A map. Not of the prison, but of influence. Lines branching outward. Connections forming shapes he understood all too well. Financial routes. authority channels, pressure points. Black Dolphin wasn't just holding legends. It was manufacturing them. And Volkov realized the most terrifying truth of all. The system didn't need him to survive. But if he joined it, he could become something far more dangerous than the man who had entered those gates in chains. Because power doesn't die behind bars. It adapts. And as Volkov traced the carved lines with his fingers, understanding fully for the first time where he truly was, a final realization settled in his mind. One that sent a chill deeper than the cold concrete ever could. The real sentence at Black Dolphin wasn't life in prison. It was life as the prison. And once you became part of it, there was no way back. Not even in death. Chapter 3. The Prison That Remembers. By the time Volkov understood the final layer of Black Dolphin, it was already too late to step away. The network didn't rush decisions. It absorbed people. Slowly. Completely. The men inside it didn't recruit the way gangs did. They waited. They observed. They tested patience, discipline, and silence. Only those who mastered isolation were allowed closer to the truth. Volkov passed every test without realizing he was being tested at all. His first real task came disguised as routine. A minor disruption in cell block D. A malfunctioning light that refused to stay off. Guards replaced it twice. Maintenance checked the wiring. Nothing worked. The light kept returning, flickering at irregular intervals, drawing irritation from staff and inmates alike. Volkov knew what it was immediately. A signal. During his next escorted movement, he shifted his posture for exactly 3 steps, then returned to normal. A meaningless action to cameras. A confirmation to the system. That night, the light stopped flickering. 2 weeks later, a senior administrator was removed from his post. Official cause, early retirement. Unofficially, he'd signed off on a construction audit that never happened. Money had vanished years earlier. The paper trail resurfaced, pristine and undeniable. Volkov hadn't touched a single document. He hadn't spoken to a single person. Yet the result was undeniable. The prison responded the only way it knew how, by tightening control. Restrictions increased. Surveillance protocols expanded. Psychological evaluations became more frequent. But each move only revealed how little control the administration truly had. Because the system inside Black Dolphin didn't resist authority. It guided it. Volkov finally met the man at the center of it all during a rare administrative transfer. The encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. They passed each other in a reinforced hallway, escorted by different guard teams. Eye contact was forbidden. Communication impossible. But the man tilted his head slightly as they crossed. That was all. Volkov recognized him instantly. Mikhail Karsov. Once a name whispered across criminal networks in Eastern Europe. A strategist. A financier. A man whose operations spanned continents without leaving fingerprints. Arrested decades earlier. Sentenced to life. Erased from public memory. Except he hadn't disappeared. He'd relocated. Karsov didn't control Black Dolphin by force. He never needed to. He understood something prisons were never designed to stop. Influence didn't require proximity. It required permanence. The men here weren't planning escapes or uprisings. They were planning longevity. Black Dolphin housed individuals with no future beyond its walls. No parole, no leverage, no exit. That made them perfect. They had nothing to lose except their relevance. Karsov's genius wasn't survival. It was transformation. He turned a warehouse of discarded men into a self-regulating system, one that traded favors, information, and pressure without ever revealing itself. Volkov was brought fully inside when the outside world crossed an invisible line. A journalist published an article questioning unexplained administrative changes tied to high-security prisons. It didn't mention Black Dolphin by name, but the implications were clear. The next morning, the article vanished. So did the journalist. Official records showed a voluntary career change. No foul play. No investigation. But inside Black Dolphin, the message was unmistakable. Someone had acted without permission. Volkov was summoned, not physically, but symbolically. His cell wall bore a new carving, deeper than all the others combined. A single phrase, written in the coded language he now understood fluently. Stability has been threatened. The response wasn't violent. It was surgical. Within weeks, policy adjustments rippled outward. Funding structures shifted. Oversight committees were reshuffled. External audits were postponed indefinitely. Every change appeared unrelated, coincidental, until you looked closely, until you followed the lines. Volkov understood then what Black Dolphin truly was. Not a prison, a vault, a place where the most dangerous men in the country weren't buried. They were preserved. Minds sharpened by isolation, egos stripped to excess, purpose refined into something cold and enduring. The world believed these men were neutralized. That belief was the prison's greatest weapon. Volkov's final test came without warning. A transfer order appeared on his file. A move to a different facility. Lower security. Administrative error on paper. Freedom of a kind. The system watched him closely, waiting. This was the only real choice Black Dolphin ever offered. Leave and become a liability, or stay and become permanent. Volkov tore the paper in half. The transfer was canceled within the hour. No one spoke of it again. Years passed. Volkov aged. His hair grayed. His body slowed. But his influence only expanded. He became a stabilizer, a translator between generations of inmates who would never meet, never speak, never share space. He wasn't famous. He was necessary. Outside the prison, governments changed. Laws shifted. Criminal networks rose and fell. But certain decisions, financial, political, strategic, always seemed to bend in familiar directions. Subtly, reliably, as if guided by an unseen hand. Decades later, a new inmate arrived. Young, intelligent, disciplined, watching everything too closely. Volkov saw himself in the man immediately. The cycle continued. On the day Volkov died, the prison didn't pause. His body was removed quietly. His cell cleaned thoroughly. Every mark erased, except one. Deep beneath layers of paint, concrete, and steel, a symbol remained untouched. Incorporated into the structure itself. The foundation. Years later, when another administrator questioned the design of an unexplained corridor buried beneath Black Dolphin, a report surfaced explaining its purpose. It had always been there, necessary, unchangeable, because Black Dolphin didn't just confine men. It absorbed them, and long after their names were forgotten, their influence remained, etched permanently into the walls of a prison the world believed was nothing more than concrete and steel. They thought the most dangerous men in Russia were locked away forever. They were wrong. They were organized. And if this story unsettled you, remember, there are prisons far more powerful than the ones you can see. You won't want to miss the next one.